Hello, this video is part of a series on an introduction to philosophy. Check out the link in the description below for more information about that. I've been talking about philosophical or critical thinking, and in this video I make some points about rhetoric and logic. First, use good rhetoric when making your case. That doesn't mean use rhetorical tricks to convince people that you are right. Rather, it means avoid using bad rhetoric that turns your audience against you. Also, there are things you need to know about rhetoric, even though you can't necessarily do anything about those things to change them, but you still need to know about those things. I will talk about those in this video. Following Aristotle, the traditional view has been that there are three main aspects to all of rhetoric. These are called ethos, pathos, and logos. Ethos refers to the speaker's own credibility as judged by the audience. Pathos refers to the speaker's ability to appeal to the emotions of the audience members. And logos means the use of reason in convincing the audience. The speaker or writer or other communicator should choose which of these aspects they emphasize and to what degree in their speech or other communication, even a TikTok clip. It is noteworthy, in my opinion, that Aristotle considered logic to be part of rhetoric. If I'm not mistaken, he thought that it's mostly useful when dealing with just one or a small number of educated people. In the case of Aristotle, that of course also means men. Or probably anyway. When speaking to the masses, appealing to emotions is more effective in some ways, but for seeking the truth, not so much. Logical reasoning is what is required for that. I will return to logic in more depth later. So here I will only give a very simple and superficial explanation of what it is. There are two main forms of logic, deductive and inductive reasoning. In both of them, the person making the argument makes an inference based on premises. Those premises are propositions that one expects others to accept. The difference between these types of reasoning is that, unlike induction, a deduction or deductive inference doesn't add new information to the premises. You could say that inductive reasoning is a bottom-up approach, while deductive reasoning is a top-down approach. A deduction contains the so-called truth value of the premises and shows what logically follows if the premises are true. A classic example of this, it may actually be a cliché, is the following syllogism. All humans are mortal. Socrates is a human. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. The power of the argument is evident to any rational person. If you accept both the premises 1 and 2, then you cannot help but see the conclusion 3 is true as well. This is caused simply by the structure of the argument, from a generalization inevitably to a specific case. if you don't want to accept the conclusion, you have to show that at least one of the premises is false. Using deduction in a counter-argument can be very efficient if you can show that the claim you are arguing against contains a logical contradiction, or one will follow from the claim or argument. A logical contradiction would be claiming that something is both the case and it is not the case simultaneously. Claiming that Socrates is a human and not a human, for example, would be a clear contradiction. If someone claims that Socrates is a human and also that he is immortal, you could point out that a logical contradiction will follow from these statements. All humans, after all, are mortal. So an immortal person cannot be a human. Your interlocutor could then just refuse to accept the premise that to be human, one would have to be mortal. When constructing your argument, or just thinking in your head really, you should try to be logically consistent. If you notice a contradiction in your own thinking, you need to re-evaluate your position and possibly change your mind. Inductive reasoning does not quite have the convincing power of a deduction. It is a generalization based on individual specific cases. The reverse of deduction in a sense. These specific cases could be, for example, observations. For example, the rat I just saw was black. That's a specific observation. All rats I have seen so far have been black. I am making a pattern recognition. So, therefore, all rats are black. That's my generalization from my experiences. This inference is not at all clearly true. The problem is not that there actually are rats of different colors, but I'm talking about the structure of this argument. It is just not as strong as a deductive argument because it is based on a limited number of observations or other specific cases. The very next case could prove the generalization to be false, observing a single white rat, for example. Still, it is clear that inductive reasoning is not a fallacy. It is not useless. It makes sense that a large number of observations by many different observers, especially if done in a systematic manner, will make generalizations of this kind more reasonable. So if you wish to convince any thinking person that you are right about some generalization, you'd better appeal to the scientific consensus on the subject, rather than a couple of anecdotes from random sources. On the other hand, if you can make your argument in the form of a deduction, it will be as convincing as the premises you have chosen. Now some points about ethos, that one part of rhetoric, so important to argumentation as well. The problem with people is that they tend to not be rational. In their book, Leena Kurki and Tuukka Tomperi list some things you should know about how that ethos aspect of rhetoric works. First, The reputation of the person making the claim has a significant impact on the credibility of the claim as judged by the audience. People are more likely to believe a statement made by someone with a good reputation than if the same statement is made by someone less well known or someone who has a bad reputation. Not always a bad thing. Also, people are more likely to believe someone from their own socio-economic class. They also tend to believe those who appear to belong to a higher class than themselves. This may be contrary to their own interests, but let's not digress. People consider physically attractive people to be more credible than less attractive people. People probably will not admit this, and possibly, if reminded of this phenomenon, they will be able to resist it to some degree, but normally this seems to be the case. Men are generally thought to be more believable than women. Whether it's internalized misogyny or something else, even many women tend to think this way. Some women also seem to believe that men make better bosses, which might be connected to this point. The approval of other people and the support of someone with a good reputation tend to increase a person's credibility. This seems to make sense, but logically it doesn't. The others may trust the person for reasons that are not connected to the person's ability and knowledge in the relevant thing. Even if a person has a reputation of being honest, it still has nothing really to do with that person's knowledge regarding the subject in question. Providing information about yourself increases your credibility, as long as you don't exaggerate. The appearance of sincerity is very important to people, even though they cannot really assess that person's actual sincerity. If the speaker is able to identify with the values of their audience, they will gain a strong basis of credibility. People are likely to agree with those who share their values. Everyone, but especially an unknown speaker, will gain credibility by providing reliable evidence in support of their argument. No surprise there. Correct use of language and a smooth presentation will increase perceived credibility. Disorderly presentation of the argument will reduce its credibility. Aggressive appearance or behavior will reduce the person's credibility. The last 3 points are especially important to remember when constructing and presenting your argument, because you can make an otherwise good case but fail to convince others because of these rhetorical blunders. The earlier points about gender, social class, and other things you may be unable to change are something you should be aware of. You may be able to find ways of diminishing the negative effects connected to them. That might require some imagination. In the next videos, I will be talking about common cognitive biases and logical fallacies. See you then.